So, what is there to say about Hidden Jewel? Pearl Andreas, Ruby's 18-year-old daughter, is the main character now, and she's about to graduate from high school as valedictorian. Honor roll is not good enough for this chick. Her family is so proud of their overachiever. She lives with her mother, Ruby, her father, Beau, and her two brothers who are twins, Jean and Pierre. Ruby's sons are maybe 11 or 12. I'm not really sure. The movie opens with Pearl having a dream of her uncle Paul in the water, but she has no idea who he is until she sees his picture in a photo album given to her by her Aunt Jean later on and is like, oh, he was all tangled up in the water, and her mother was like, was he dead in the water? And Pearl is like, how did you know that? Because you just told her that. Duh. But let's back up because I'm getting ahead of the plot. Pearl's the valedictorian and she's about to graduate. Her two younger brothers are proud she's their big sis. The dark-haired one, Jean, apparently likes to pull pranks, where he will put a sign on someone's back that says, "Kick me." But on this particular day, he slaps a poem on Sister Pearl's back during a hug, and it's a very simple rhyme about how great she is. Apparently, she's part of the class of 1982, but as always, the story is timeless, aside from Ruby's teased red hair. Just like in the Cutler series, the original Ruby has come back to play the older Ruby. They have not aged up the actress like they did in the Dollenganger and Castile series. The original Beau came back as well. Pearl is played by the actress who played Lee in Web of Dreams, so interesting to see her make a comeback. So now we're at the point where Pearl sees the photo of Paul and freaks out. Jean doesn't remember putting that photo in the album. Ruby thinks it's a bad omen and begins to freak out. Beau thinks his wife is just being superstitious and silly. Pearl is more logical. She wants to be a doctor, by the way. She thinks she maybe has buried memories of Paul that are bubbling to the surface, even though Ruby insists she never told Pearl about his death. But she could have overheard something. You know, characters in these books and movies are always overhearing things. And even if she overheard it when she was 2, it could have stuck in the back of her memory. Who knows? Pearl has a boyfriend named Claude who wants to get with her, if you know what I mean. He tries to convince her to leave her graduation party with him, but Ruby guilts her daughter into sticking around by saying she feels a little woozy. So Claude decides he and Pearl can just do it in the other room. But Pearl says no, and he becomes a real jerk over it. She wants to break up with him, but he's like, no, I'm breaking up with you. And guess what? I've already told everyone that we've already done it, so blah. Not long after, Ruby finds out that Nina is dying, but Nina has a message for her before she passes on. Ruby tells her daughter about the curse she brought on her sister Giselle years ago. All she'd wanted was for Giselle to stop being so mean to her, but it backfired, and then Giselle went and got into that accident, ended up in a wheelchair. By the way, she totally faked needing that wheelchair for longer than she really did. And then she ended up getting bitten by a mosquito, going into a long coma before eventually dying. So this curse Ruby talks about is the real deal. She rushes to Mama Didi's, but doesn't make it in time. Nina's gone. Mama Didi has no idea what Nina wanted to say, but tells Ruby to bring a sacrifice to the cemetery. And by the way, if you don't remember, Mama Didi is that voodoo priestess. I believe it is. She was in the first movie. So Ruby becomes convinced that there's bad energy that surrounds her and that she has to atone for something, but she really doesn't know what to do, so she decides to start singing a Catholic prayer in addition to taking a trip to the cemetery, of course. Not long after, young Jean gets bitten by a snake and dies. Pierre falls ill shortly after. Seems obvious to me that the stress of having lost his twin is what's causing Pierre to be so ill, but it takes Pearl a bit longer to consider the fact that maybe he's suffering from a broken heart. And after reading about the condition in the book, she proposes the idea of broken heart syndrome to the doctor who refers her to a psychiatrist. Sounds like just a fancy way of saying, he's stressed out over the loss of his twin. I could have told you that. Pierre begins to stabilize, but then Ruby drives off and disappears, and Pearl is a mess. Ruby needs to be here for Pierre, because family is important, damn it. But Ruby's pulling a melody from Seeds of Yesterday and being like, I can't go to the hospital to be with my son. It's all my fault. I have no idea why I'm making Ruby sound like Fanny Castile, but there you go. Ruby's neck deep in this black magic stuff and intent on finding a way to end the curse. If being prideful and selfish leads to curses, I'm not sure why more kids don't die every day by snakebite, but whatever. Bo and Pearl go to Ruby's old shack to try to locate her, but she's not there, so they decide to check out Cypress Woods. There they meet this guy from Southern Oil named John, whose name is too similar to Pearl's brother's name for my liking. Right away, he makes eyes at the 18-year-old. Bo calls around looking for Ruby, and I guess he calls the hospital too because he finds out that Pierre's condition has worsened. Then Bo trips on the stairs because it's just one thing after another with his family and ends up in the hospital as well. Apparently being banged up makes him incapable of making a life or death decision regarding his minor son's medical care, so it falls on Pearl's shoulders. She agrees to let the doctor administer a risky IV antibiotic to her brother. John calls the hospital asking for Pearl. He caught sight of her mother and says he knows which way she's headed. They go to Grandmare's grave. She's not there, so they go to Cypress Woods. Again? Did he lie to Pearl when he said he knew where Ruby was going just to get her alone? Because they seem to be going around in circles. So I think maybe he did lie. They stay overnight at Cypress Woods, I believe, cuddling together to keep warm. What the heck is wrong with Pearl getting so cozy with some mystery man when there's a curse following her family? So anyway, she and John later go to visit Pearl's Aunt Jean because maybe the curse has to do with Jean and Gladys Tate, Paul's mother and sister. Why not? Let's eat up some more time. At the Tate home, Pearl runs into that old creepbuster who's got his eye on her now. Jean is very kind to Pearl and tells her a little more about Paul and Ruby's backstory. Gladys, on the other hand, rolls into the sitting area on her wheelchair, ranting about how Ruby killed Paul by driving him to an early watery grave. Pearl and John, alone at his place, do a little more flirting, and it quickly escalates. Clearly, the story was written by a man. So, after their little sexy encounter, John has to go to work or something, leaving Pearl alone. And who comes a-knocking but that buster creep, telling her he's found Ruby. But he's really just scheming to get her alone so that he can get that wife he paid Ruby's grandfather for 2 decades earlier. I'm pretty sure Ruby gave the money back to him when she escaped his clutches the first time, though. So even though I don't agree with buying young wives like that, I don't even think from a contractual standpoint he has a case. Pearl beats him up, forces him into a cage he'd initially intended for her because there aren't enough Lifetime movies out there about caged women, and then runs off. She later gets him arrested. Pearl is starting to see her mother's side of things. She now believes in the curse. Ruby thinks Paul is trying to get revenge, but Pearl thinks he's just reaching out for help. Ruby decides to paint a picture of Paul's drowned corpse as a tribute to him, thinking this will convince him that she really did care for him. She brings the painting to Mama Didi and they burn it, and Ruby tells Paul's spirit that she has never forgotten him, but it's time to let go. So that's that. But Mama Didi warns that Pierre might still die because when your twin dies, that's what happens. You often die too. Unless he decides that he wants to live. That's how life works. So the Andreas family returns to the hospital where Pierre is off the antibiotics. It's up to him and his will to thrive now. And guess what? He gains consciousness, but a little of Jean lives on in his brother. Pierre signs his father's cast with the words, "Kick me." I give this movie a 2 out of 5. Incredibly sappy and over the top, and the title feels like a desperate grasp at sticking with a Jewel theme. But I'm glad I can now say that I've watched it, and I'll probably eventually read the book. Someday. Or reread it. Funny that I have no memory of reading it or not reading it. That's how unmemorable it was to me.